Have you ever had a dress that you've had for some years now, and you start noticing that the seams get stressed, and then all of a sudden you get this tear inside of it? Well, I'm going to show you how to fix that so that it doesn't happen again. All that's coming up next on Sewing with Nyler. This is one of my favorite dresses, and it's an old one. I've made it years and years and years ago, and I wanted to show you what happens. This is like a rayon type fabric, and over time rayon has a tendency to, get stressed right there at the seams, and so eventually this is what happens. I don't know if you see this. I hope the camera's picking this up, but you can see where it stretches when you sit down and the body spreads out. It'll do this on the hip area, and it'll also do it on the sides. But it looks like our sides are okay, but they're getting stretched just a little bit right here. You can see that little stress mark right there. But anyway, and here's another area of the sides where we have that stress mark. So you can see the stressing right there. Eventually this is going to tear. So since the one in the back has already ripped, I'm going to show you how to fix this so that this problem doesn't happen again in the future. So I have the dress flipped on the inside, so you may not be able to see it as good, but I'm going to try to zoom in and let you see. So you can see where the stress tears are right here. That's where we're going to be, making that repair. Okay, so I'm going to take the seam and lay the seam flat like this. And when I lay it flat, you might be able to see it a little bit better. But there's a couple of ways you can fix this. A couple of items you can use to fix this. You can either use some single fold bias tape, but my favorite way is to use ribbon. And the ribbon is nice and strong and it doesn't give, whereas the bias tape has a tendency to stretch and you get a curve. We don't want a curve, we want a straight stitch. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut a piece, and I can see where the stress is starting to happen down here. So I'm going to start by pinning this right, or clipping it right where I want the seam to be. So you can see the seam right here. So I'm going to lay it on top of the seam, and I'm going to clip it. And then as we go up, it's the same thing. But once I get to this side, because the dress is already torn right here, I'm going to be bringing the seam in a little bit toward the inside. Because what we're doing is we're creating a new seam and we're trying to make it sturdy. So I'm going to pin it like that. Well, I say clamp it, I pin it, but I'm clamping it. And I'm going to stop up here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off. Now I'll show you how to do this with pins also, because it works both. It works with pins and clips. So you would put a pin right there and hold that in, because that's exactly where I'm going to stitch so that I can get beyond the hole and the stress area that's there. And then the same thing here, but when I get back up to the top, I want to make sure this ribbon goes back into my seam right here, so that I'll go back and join my seam so it doesn't look like I stopped in the middle of nowhere, or started and stopped in the middle of nowhere. And as you sew, you're going to sew on top of the ribbon and make sure the seam is flat on the other side. You're going to start by sewing into the seam that's already there. So of course you're going to back stitch. And I'm using a different color thread just so you can see what it looks like. And start. So now when I get to this part here, I'm going to remove the clamp, and I'm going to take a pin. I'm going to lift the presser foot up. I'm going to take a pin, and I'm going to stick a pin right in there to hold that down. And I'm going to carefully sew over that pin just to catch it. Once I catch it, then I'm going to remove this pin. So now I can back stitch on that. So now you're going to keep it straight and hold it tight. And you're going to just simply sew straight down the middle of the ribbon. And as you can see, now we've come to the stressed area right here. This is the part that's actually coming apart. So we want to definitely make sure we're on the outside of that. So I'm going to go ahead and take my pin out, because I'm going to stretch it as I sew. Okay. And now that I'm finishing up, I'm just going to sew all the way down, and then when I get to the end of the ribbon, I'm just going to go back and meet my seam. I'm going to stop there, and now I'm going to show you what that looks like. Cut my threads off. And the reason we did this is because it's giving some stability to the dress, so I'm going to flip it over. But you can see where I stitched it. It's puckered a little bit because it hasn't been pressed. So that part has been repaired, and I'm going to press it down flat, and I'll show you how nice and smooth it lays. So here's my dress. Here's the back. The back was a V. And you can see my seams. Now that I pressed them, the seam is right here. I'll just follow it with my finger so you can see how nicely it looks now. It actually looks brand new. It looks like it was just sewn, and it's nice and smooth. And the purpose for using this tape is to give it some stability, because rayon fabric has a tendency to pull and stretch. And if you don't catch it when you're sewing it, and then you wear it and it's stressed, because once it's stressed, you can't repair the stress. You're just going to have to sew the seam up and make it tighter. A thin seam binding, when you start to sew the garment the first time, you won't ever get these stress marks, or these stretch areas where the fabric starts to unravel and come undone. So my dress has been repaired. I'm happy, and as you can see in this photo, it looks fabulous. I love, love, love this dress. So I hope this tip has been helpful on how to repair or how to prevent stress marks in your garment. I hope that you try it. Happy sewing.